So you wasted your entire life voting for conservatives, only to watch how they actually don't conserve anything and are just gay and retarded. And now you assume the far right will fix decades of bullshit in just one single election cycle. Boy, let me tell you what you are in for, because you really have to know what happens if the far right loses, wins, but it goes completely wrong, and what you should do to prepare right now. Because the average far right voter believes that if they just win the next election, it will magically bring back the past and everything will be great again. But if you look at the way the world is moving and at the way technology is moving, it becomes pretty clear that the world of the 1950s will never come back. The single most important thing which the right does not understand yet is the fact that the current economic world system in which we have been living for the last 400 years has reached the end of its lifespan. It's finished. No amount of politics can resurrect it. The elites at the very top have been knowing this for decades and are very well prepared, which is where the whole premise of a new world order is coming from. The current economic world system is also known as capitalism, and I will make the very controversial statement that we don't actually live under capitalism anymore. We still have free markets, but that is just a small subset of capitalism. The entire system actually died in 2008 and has been kept alive only by injecting infinite amounts of cheap money into it to keep it going for just a few more decades so the rich can escape. This becomes more evident if you consider that the only growth we see nowadays comes either from the money printer or from expropriating wealth from the white middle class in the Western world. Which is why so many stocks are completely detached from reality and make zero sense. So into what is this system being transitioned to? This depends completely on who will win the culture war. Because the elites are not just one single group. They hate each other and are actively fighting about who will stay at the top in the new system. So what does it mean for you, the average far-right voter? The good news is that while the elites are busy with fighting, you now have a gap where the far-right can not only exist within but also thrive. The bad news is that most of what is going to happen is completely outside of your control and you only have influence over saving your own ass. But can you actually save your own ass? What if the pendulum keeps swinging left and will completely destroy every single bit of hope you ever had about the far-right future? To explain that, let's look at the four main political factions: the economic left, the cultural left, the economic right, and the ethnocentric right. The one thing which they all have in common is that they are all infiltrated by intelligence agencies, completely depend on funding from large NGOs, and are mere chess pieces in the greater game. The left is for whatever reason the only group to which my videos are getting recommended to, and why I only get like 10 views. So if you're not a leftist, I really have to know how the heck you found my channel. The economic left is dead and doesn't really exist anymore. The only way economic leftism could ever work is if they impose a wealth tax on all countries at the very same time in one single move. Otherwise they will just end up taxing their own local entrepreneurs to death and can no longer compete with other countries. This is exactly how the European Union has taxed and regulated its own tech industry to death, and now they are completely dependent on America and China. It is also the reason why rivaling countries are funding left-wing NGOs everywhere around the world to get rid of the competition. The cultural left is now also losing. They can only win this war if we see an economic miracle within the next 4 to 5 years. Because cultural leftism only works if the average Joe is completely drowned in entertainment, with the burger in one hand and the beer in the other one. If the TV is blasting on full volume and the McDonald's kicks in, he is in a state where he just doesn't care if the left is pushing their gay diversity bullshit. But this doesn't mean the cultural left is dead and the pendulum will never swing back. It can swing back really bad for one last time. It will be so much worse than COVID and the lockdowns. Worse than the deplatforming we saw during the George Floyd era. But it will not be able to kill the right and instead radicalize them to the point of no return. The sheer amount of pressure under which the right will have to live during this time period will shape them into a cult, with a comeback that makes 2016 and 2025 pale in comparison. And why will the left never be able to defeat the far right completely? Because first of all, once leftists start winning, they will naturally turn onto each other over the most mundane bullshit. And since they have already been completely infiltrated by the rich, they will receive millions of dollars of funding to accelerate these types of internal conflicts until the controlled left falls apart again. And second, there's a certain part of the elite which will not survive without the far right and is completely dependent on them. But this is a double-edged sword and is the reason why there is a divide between the economic right and the ethnocentric right. The prime example of this conflict is happening right now around Germany's AfD. One side wants remigration, while the others want to keep the migrants, but if they don't behave, you get the full-blown police state to bring back law and order. One side wants to go back to the high-trust society which they had 2 decades ago, while the others want total surveillance and the death penalty. It's full free speech for everybody versus the others who just want to extend the current hate speech laws to also persecute Antifa and Islamists. One is completely indifferent towards Israel, others are hardcore Zionists. And lastly, one side wants a strong independent Europe, while the others are just transatlantic vessels. It is obvious which side you want to win, but the unfortunate reality is that the win will likely go to the other side. Why? Because they simply have exponentially more funding available. But this does not mean the fight is already lost. In reality, the final outcome will be somewhere in the middle and depends heavily on how much each side is willing to fight. It's like when a giant monster is taking over your village. You already know you will not be able to defeat it, but if you manage to at least break off one of its arms, maybe a leg, and stab it into the eye, its reign will not be as brutal as it would be otherwise. And that is exactly what this entire culture war will be about if you are realistic about outcomes. You should actually be optimistic about the cultural right, because not only was it non-existent 20 years ago, but as of right now it is even thriving. Unfortunately, institutions, courts, NGOs, universities and sponsorships are still in left-wing hands. And if you want to win, you have to understand how they got here. Since the 1960s, they have been winning constantly. When they get elected, they push society left. But when so-called conservatives win, they never move the pendulum back. It is a cycle of going left and staying there. Going left and staying there. The left has only achieved that because they play by different rules. For example, it is pretty easy to intimidate right-wingers with historic guilt. But if you bring up how many people died during socialism, the left gives absolutely no shits and just continues pushing their leftism. Right-wingers are so afraid of getting pushback, they rather throw away their entire viewpoint than standing their ground. For example, a right-winger proposes to ban no-fault divorce. But after just a little bit of emotional pushback, after just a little bit of bullshit statistics about domestic violence, he completely pivots. And then when the leftist beats him to death, and don't worry, he called him a Nazi first, other leftists will go on the streets to show solidarity and will protest for his innocence. But right-wingers, when one of them does something controversial, cave in completely and give up the fight altogether. There's only one situation where the left pretends to cave in, and that's when they are in a losing position. This is the moment when they play their most powerful card, which has been tricking right-wingers for decades. Because now, seemingly out of nowhere, they suddenly stop talking about gay marriage and trans issues. Now it's suddenly about wealth inequality, healthcare and homeless people. You know, the only people who benefit from this culture war are the super rich. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's both agree to just stop with all these culture wars. And when the right-winger caves in, like he always does, the leftist doesn't and goes back to pushing his gay diversity. Why? Because the only thing leftists care about is winning. So stop playing by their rules. They hate you. It makes zero sense to retract. Your back is already against the wall. But don't think it is your job to be a hero and go to prison for your cause. Because there is a real chance that this entire far-right movement goes completely wrong. Instead, you should see all of this as a backup plan. Your primary goal should be to get rich as fast as possible, because otherwise you will end up being a depressed loser in the coming world order.